Begin with breaking news. President Trump clarifying his position on U.S. involvement in Syria. A senior administration official telling CNN that Mr. Trump has told his national security team that he's willing to keep American troops in the war-torn nation for now, but he wants them out soon. And this is coming after we heard mixed messages about the administration's policy on Syria. CNN's Caitlin Collins is live for us at the White House. Tell us about this meeting, Caitlin.
Yeah, that's right, Brianna. Some brand new information from my colleague Kevin Liptak, who says during that meeting with his national security team at the White House here yesterday, the president said he is willing to keep troops in Syria for the short term, but maintained that overall he wants to cut an exit in Syria. Now, this is something the president first said during an speech on infrastructure in Cleveland, Ohio last week, catching a lot of military officials off guard when he said that the U.S. would be coming out of Syria soon. This is something he repeated yesterday during that press conference with Baltic leaders here at the White House yesterday, saying, quote, "I want to get out. I want to bring our troops home." And now this is something that goes in contrast with what military officials have said, who said the battle with ISIS in Syria is not over yet. But the president has made clear he wants to get troops out of Syria, telling his national security team that yesterday. And this decision, Brianna, we have reported is more than just national security here. It also has some economic factors as well, because the president has actually been fixated by these big jumbo jets that these Persian Gulf monarchs have. And in a conversation that he recounted to some people recently, he told one Gulf leader, quote, "Without us, you wouldn't last 2 weeks. You'd be overrun. You'd have to fly commercial." Now, that comes after yesterday the president said he wants other countries in the area to start picking up the tab to have troops from the United States there helping out in Syria. But what's clear here, Brianna, is the president maintains he does want to get troops out of Syria, but he's willing to keep them there in the short term to help with the transition while they plan for a withdrawal. But overall, he does want those troops to come out of Syria. Brianna.
Caitlin Collins at the White House. Thank you. Let's go to Fred Pleitgen. He's joining us live from Damascus. Fred, what does this mean for the conflict there on the ground in Syria?
Yeah. Well, it certainly is something that continuously undermines American credibility. And, Caitlin was just saying how the president says that he wants other nations to take charge here in Syria. Well, I can tell you the three nations that are saying they're happy to oblige are Turkey, Iran, and especially Russia. Those are by far the most important outside players here on the ground. And even as the U.S. is discussing whether or not to stay in Syria in the medium term, those three nations actually have a summit that's going on today in Turkey where they're debating the future of Syria. Now, of course, the U.S. is not at the table and therefore is not going to be part of that decision-making, but you can already see these three countries essentially carving out a sphere of influence for themselves. And of course, the big issue, Brianna, with that is that there's forces here on the ground that have fought with the U.S. and continue to fight with the U.S. against ISIS. And a lot of those forces are pretty angry, like, for instance, the Kurds that are now getting squeezed by the Turks. And some of them, of course, will have no choice in the future than to try and speak to the Russians to see whether.
All right, unfortunately, we lost Fred's signal there from Damascus. As you can imagine, there are some technical difficulties getting reports out of there. I want to bring in now Barbara Starr. She's our CNN Pentagon correspondent, and Kimberly Dozier, a CNN global affairs analyst. She's also the executive editor of the Cipher Brief. Barbara, just if you can make some sense of this for us, is this a cohesive policy that has been in the works? Because this counters even what you were reporting yesterday, that U.S. military leaders are planning to expand the military footprint in Syria by dozens.
Well, let's start with that very point. What they want to do is put several dozen additional troops in northern Syria because they think they need more capability up there. They're still fighting ISIS in that region, and they're still trying to help support U.S.-backed fighters in that region. That shows how complicated it is. That's a short-term goal. The president talking long-term. He wants to bring U.S. forces home. I think it's fair to say U.S. generals would like nothing better. Of course they want to be able to bring the troops home, but it's a matter of timing. I don't think you can find a U.S. military commander or the Secretary of Defense who currently thinks that ISIS is defeated in Syria. So if it's not defeated, that means you still have a terror threat. You still have the possibility of ISIS taking hold, plotting and planning, and even moving across the border back into Iraq. You have Russia and Iran, as Fred just reported, very happily expanding their own influence in Syria, watching very carefully to see how and when U.S. troops withdraw. Bashar al-Assad would not be, I think most people think, still in power if it wasn't for the backing of the Russian regime. So it's hard to see what the president thinks he'll achieve by quickly bringing troops home. It could be a big problem. But here's the bigger problem, Brianna. What does it really mean to defeat ISIS? This is always the big challenge. You're talking about defeating an ideology. You're talking about decades of trying to move against something that is very much taken hold in this particular region of the world. Bombs and bullets won't solve it alone. Brianna?
Kim, these comments by the president, he was ad-libbing the other day. He was at what was supposed to be a rally for infrastructure, and he talked about we're going to be out of Syria, and very soon. This was not in the prompter. This was something just off the cuff. Is some of this just cover for the president having said that, which is, yes, a long-held desire of his to not take ownership of the conflict in this region, even though realistically the U.S. already has?
Well, I think we're seeing a pattern that frequently happens. Donald Trump says something about his foreign policy. His national security team scrambles to fill in the blanks for the public because it's something they've been discussing behind closed doors. I think we're getting a glimpse of the arguments that Trump has had with his national security team. He wants the troops out. They have seen this movie before. They don't want to be going back in 6 months to a year to clean up a new version of ISIS or a strengthened offshoot of al-Qaeda inside Syria. Also, the U.S. allies, Israel and Jordan, are both saying, please keep some troop presence on the ground because that maintains a physical presence that Russian-backed Syrian forces and Iranian-backed forces and militia will respect and have to stay away from. When you see that battleground, that leaves the former U.S. Kurdish allies there to go it alone.
Part of the head-scratching nature of all of this is really the mixed messages that we're seeing from this administration. Let's listen to U.S. Ambassador to the UN, Nikki Haley. She came down hard on Syria's use of chemical weapons just moments ago.
The Assad regime keeps dropping chlorine bombs on innocent men, women, and children. Our lack of action has consequences. When we let one regime off the hook, others take notice.
Barbara, how do U.S. allies know who to believe?
Well, let's look at for a second at what Nikki Haley's talking about. Now, she has taken a big left turn here because the issue of these chlorine bombs is not ISIS, but rather the Syrian regime led by Bashar al-Assad, backed up by Vladimir Putin, who basically keeps him in power. Does the U.S. plan to go after this and basically challenge Russia? When the president talks about bringing in allied countries in the region to fight in Syria, are they going to go against Russia? Not very likely. You already have a number of countries in the ISIS coalition, but for key military tasks and start off with aerial bombing of any target, it is really the U.S. that has the capability to gather the intelligence, to pinpoint a target and attack a target. So what Nikki Haley's talking about may be a diplomatic effort to get the regime to back off of these chemical weapons, but so far, no indication that's working. No amount of diplomatic action is going to really change Bashar al-Assad's mind unless Putin changes his mind. And let me just very quickly add, a few days ago, the top U.S. military commander in the region, General Joseph Votel, was asked before Congress, is it still U.S. policy that Bashar al-Assad must go? General Votel paused for a moment and said he did not know. That's the top U.S. commander. That's a lot of uncertainty about where U.S. policy is headed.
I mean, that just speaks volumes. When the president was speaking yesterday, he was saying, well, you know, if you want us to stay, so if you want the U.S. to stay, maybe you're going to have to pay. He was talking about Saudi Arabia. Is that realistic, Kim?
Well, I think that's a big ask of Saudi Arabia, which is already conducting an operation in Yemen, which helps the U.S. with its counterterrorism mission against al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula there. And Saudi Arabia has been part of the coalition fighting ISIS in Iraq and Syria. Look, there is another way that they could continue this mission, which is to withdraw most of the U.S. forces into Iraq and bases there, and then do in and out missions. So that's a way to keep it going. But yes, this is going to be costly. I think there might be a bit of arguing behind closed doors about who's going to pay the bulk of this mission.
Interesting. All right, Kim Dozier, thank you so much. Barbara Starr, really appreciate it.